October 25, 1944. Off the coast of Samar Island, Philippines, radar operator Robert Billy stared at his scope aboard the USS Johnston, watching what appeared to be a malfunction. The screen showed massive contacts bearing down from the north. Too many contacts, too big. His hand trembled as he reached for the intercom. Bridge combat. Multiple surface contacts bearing 340, range 2,000 yards. They're big, sir. Real big. On the bridge, Commander Ernest Evans, a Cherokee Indian from Oklahoma who had once told his crew, "This is going to be a fighting ship, and when we go into action we will hit hard and continuously," grabbed his binoculars and scanned the horizon. What he saw through the early morning haze made his blood run cold. Pagoda masts. Dozens of them. The distinctive silhouettes of Japanese battleships and heavy cruisers, their massive 18-inch and 14-inch guns, already beginning to range-find American escort carriers barely 10 miles away. The enemy force included 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers, the most powerful surface action group Japan could still field. The USS Johnston was a Fletcher-class destroyer displacing 2,700 tons, armed with 5 5-inch guns and 10 torpedoes. She was one of 7 destroyers and destroyer escorts, tasked with protecting 6 escort carriers carrying aircraft supporting the invasion of Leyte. Between the Japanese fleet and those carriers stood nothing. But these tiny warships, Evans didn't hesitate. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't calculate the odds or consider retreat. He grabbed the intercom and issued the command that would doom his ship, but save thousands of American lives. All ahead flank. Comments making smoke. "All hands to battle stations! We're going in!" The crew of USS Johnston had exactly 90 seconds to comprehend what their captain had just ordered. They were charging straight at the most powerful battleship force in the Pacific, alone in a destroyer that weighed less than one of the enemy battleship's main gun turrets. This is the story of the most lopsided naval engagement in modern history, of a captain who charged a battleship fleet without orders, of a crew that followed him into certain death without question, of a destroyer that fought 4 battleships, multiple cruisers, and a destroyer squadron simultaneously while already mortally wounded, and of how one small ship's suicidal courage caused an entire Japanese fleet to retreat from certain victory. The Battle of Samar would last 2.5 hours. USS Johnston would survive exactly 98 minutes of it. But in those 98 minutes, one small destroyer would prove that sometimes the size of the fight in the ship matters more than the size of the ship in the fight. August 15th, 1942. Pawnee, Oklahoma. 2 years before the battle, Ernest Edwin Evans stood on the porch of his family's small house, holding the telegram that would change his life. At 35 years old, after 16 years in the Navy, 10 as an enlisted man, 6 as an officer, he had finally received command of his own ship. USS Johnston, a brand-new Fletcher-class destroyer under construction at Seattle-Tacoma Shipbuilding Corporation, would be his first command. His father, Joseph Evans, a full-blooded Cherokee elder, watched his son read the telegram. "You have that look," the old man said. "The same look your great-grandfather had before he stood against the soldiers on the Trail of Tears." Ernest looked up. "They're giving me a warship, Father. A real fighting ship. Then you will take her into battle?" "That's what warships do." Joseph Evans nodded slowly. "Your great-grandfather told me something before he died. He said a warrior's duty is not to survive. It is to protect his people, even if protection costs everything." "You remember that?" "I remember. The men on your ship will be your tribe now. Your people. You protect them by being brave enough to do what others won't. You understand?" Ernest looked at the telegram again, then at his father. "I understand." He didn't know it then, but that conversation would define every decision he would make as captain of USS Johnston. When the moment came to charge or retreat, to fight or flee, to die or surrender, Ernest Evans would remember his great-grandfather's lesson. A warrior protects his people, no matter the cost. Ernest Edwin Evans was born on August 13, 1908 in Pawnee, Oklahoma. His mother was part Cherokee, making Ernest 1/8 Cherokee by blood. In the early 20th century, being Native American meant facing discrimination that would have broken lesser men. Jobs were scarce, educational opportunities limited, respect even more rare. But Evans had something that couldn't be taken away: determination forged in the fires of adversity. He joined the Navy in 1926 at age 18, enlisting as a common sailor. While most Native Americans faced prejudice, Evans found the Navy's meritocracy liberating. On a ship, what mattered was competence, courage, and character. Evans had all three in abundance. For 10 years, he worked his way up through the enlisted ranks, seaman to petty officer to chief. He studied navigation, gunnery, seamanship, and leadership. He learned ships from the bottom up, the way that creates the best officers. He knew what enlisted men faced because he'd faced it himself. In 1936, through a competitive examination available to enlisted men, Evans secured an appointment to the Naval Academy. At 28 years old, he was older than his classmates by nearly a decade. While they hazed plebes and worried about weekend liberty, Evans studied with the focus of a man who understood what opportunity meant. He graduated in 1931 after completing the accelerated wartime curriculum. His class ranking was middle of the pack, but his tactical scores were exceptional. One instructor noted in his file, "Ensign Evans demonstrates an aggressive mindset unusual even in this aggressive class. He seems to view every tactical problem as an opportunity to attack rather than defend." This could either make him a great combat commander or get him killed, possibly both. For the next decade, Evans served on cruisers and destroyers throughout the Pacific. He was a gunnery officer on USS Alden during the attack on Pearl Harbor, experiencing firsthand the devastation of that surprise assault. He survived. His ship was in dry dock undergoing repairs and escaped damage, but the experience marked him. He had seen American ships burning, sailors dying, and an enemy that fought without mercy or warning. When war came, Evans was ready. More than ready. He was eager. By 1942, Lieutenant Commander Evans had earned a reputation as an aggressive, competent destroyer officer. He was recommended for command, passed the rigorous qualification boards, and was selected to command USS Johnston, then under construction. The date of his promotion to command was September 27, 1943. The ship's commissioning ceremony would be 1 week later. October 27, 1943, Seattle, Washington. USS Johnston commissioning ceremony. The morning fog hung thick over Puget Sound as USS Johnston prepared for her commissioning. The destroyer sat at the pier, her gray paint fresh, her guns gleaming, her crew assembled on deck in dress uniforms. She was beautiful in the way that warships are beautiful, sleek, powerful, purposeful. Commander Ernest Evans stood at attention on the quarterdeck as the official commissioning orders were read. Around him stood his officers: Lieutenant Commander Robert Hagan, the executive officer; Lieutenant Robert Hollenbaugh, the communications officer; Lieutenant Ed DeGardi, the gunnery officer; and 15 other officers who would lead Johnston's crew of 327 men. The ceremony concluded with Evans officially assuming command. He turned to face his assembled crew: farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college students from California, sons of immigrants from New York, young men, most barely out of their teens, who had volunteered to sail into the teeth of the most powerful navy on earth. Evans had prepared a speech. He'd written it carefully, revised it multiple times, shown it to senior officers who had advised him to tone down the aggressive rhetoric. He threw the prepared speech away and spoke from his heart. "Men, I am a Cherokee Indian. My great-grandfather survived the Trail of Tears. He taught my father, and my father taught me. A warrior's duty is to protect his people, even if it costs his life. You are my people now, my tribe, and I will protect you with everything I have." He paused, letting that sink in, his dark eyes sweeping across the assembled crew. But protection doesn't mean safety. It means victory. And victory requires courage. This ship, this beautiful, powerful ship, is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way. I intend to take this ship wherever the enemy is. And when we find them, we will attack. We will attack aggressively, violently, and without hesitation. We will hit hard, and we will hit continuously. Some of the younger sailors shifted nervously. This wasn't the standard commissioning speech. This sounded like a declaration of war against the entire Japanese Navy. Evans continued, his voice rising with intensity. "This ship will always go forward, never backward. We will never retreat. We will never surrender. When we go into action, we will engage with everything we have and we will keep fighting until either they are sunk or we are sunk. There is no middle ground in warfare. There is only victory or death. He let that hang in the air for a moment, then his voice softened slightly. I know this sounds harsh. I know some of you are thinking your captain is crazy. Maybe I am. But I promise you this. I will never ask you to do anything I wouldn't do myself. I will lead from the front. I will share your dangers. And when the time comes to fight, I will take us into the teeth of the enemy because that's what warriors do. That's what this ship will do. Evans straightened to attention. Now anyone who doesn't want to go along with this program had better get off right now. I mean it, no shame, no questions asked. This ship is for fighters. If you're not ready to fight, you don't belong here. Nobody moved, not one man. 327 sailors and officers stood in absolute silence, processing what their new captain had just told them. Then, from somewhere in the ranks, a voice called out, 3 cheers for the captain! The crew erupted in cheers that echoed across the shipyard. Workers on nearby vessels stopped and stared at this unusual display. Senior officers observing the ceremony looked at each other with raised eyebrows. One admiral watching from the pier muttered to his aide, "That's either the most inspiring or the most insane commissioning speech I've ever heard." His aide replied, "Sir, I think it might be both." Evans stood motionless during the cheering, his face impassive, but his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. These men had accepted his challenge. They had chosen to follow him into whatever hell awaited. Now he had to make sure they were ready. October 1943, August 1944. Training and combat operations. Commander. Evans drove his crew relentlessly. From the day Johnston left Seattle, he conducted continuous training exercises that tested every system and every man to their breaking point. Gunnery drills at dawn, damage control exercises at noon, night torpedo attacks at midnight, man overboard drills at 2 a.m., general quarters called without warning, forcing the crew to sprint to battle stations from their bunks, from meals, from sleep. Lieutenant Commander Hagen, the executive officer, watched with concern as the crew grew exhausted from the relentless pace. After 2 weeks of continuous drills, he approached Evans in his cabin. "Sir, the men are getting worn down. We've been drilling 18 hours a day. They need rest." Evans looked up from the tactical manual he was studying. "Bob, in combat, the Japanese aren't going to let us rest. They're going to shoot at us continuously until either we're dead or they're dead. We need to be able to fight when we're exhausted, when we're scared, when everything is on fire and people are dying. That's what I'm training them for. Sir, this is peacetime training. We're not in combat yet." Yet, Evans emphasized, "but we will be. And when that day comes, the crew that survives is the crew that's been trained harder than the enemy. I'd rather have my men curse me now and live later than like me now and die later." Hagen nodded slowly. "I understand, sir. But if we push too hard, we'll have accidents. Men will get hurt during training. Better hurt during training than dead in combat. Double the damage control drills. I want every man to be able to fight fires, patch holes, and stop flooding blindfolded. Because in combat, when the lights go out and the ship is full of smoke, they'll be doing it blind anyway." The training continued, and it did result in injuries. Sprained ankles from men running to battle stations, burned hands from hot gun barrels, bruised shins from stumbling through darkened passages during blackout drills. But it also created something remarkable, a crew that functioned like a machine, where every man knew his job perfectly and could execute it under the worst conditions imaginable. The gunnery drills were especially intensive. Evans demanded accuracy that bordered on perfection. Gun crews fired at towed targets until their hands bled from loading shells. They practiced firing at different ranges, different speeds, different elevations. They learned to hit targets while the ship was maneuvering violently, while smoke obscured their vision, while under simulated enemy fire. Chief Gunner's Mate Lawrence Hubbard, a career Navy man who had served on destroyers for 15 years, told his gun crews, "The captain wants perfection. So we're going to give him perfection, because when we're shooting at Jap ships, perfection means they die and we live. Anything less means we die and they laugh." The torpedo training was equally demanding. Evans required his torpedo men to be able to load, aim and fire all 10 torpedoes in under 60 seconds. This was an insane requirement. Most destroyers needed 3 minutes, but Evans was adamant. In combat, we might get exactly one chance to launch torpedoes before the enemy destroys us. We need to get all 10 fish in the water as fast as possible. Practice until you can do it in your sleep. Chief Torpedoman James Howe drilled his men until they could perform the entire launch sequence without conscious thought. They practiced in daylight, in darkness, in simulated combat conditions with the captain calling out random emergencies. Fire in the torpedo room. Man overboard. Flooding in the forward magazine. The torpedo crews learned to launch weapons while simultaneously fighting fires, evacuating wounded and conducting damage control. The damage control training was perhaps the most important. Evans insisted that every man, from the newest seaman to the most senior officer, be qualified in firefighting, shoring, and flooding control. He personally inspected every damage control station, tested every pump, examined every firefighting hose. Lieutenant Ellsworth Welch, the damage control officer, initially resented Evans' micromanagement. After one particularly intensive inspection, where Evans found 3 deficiencies, Welch complained to the executive officer. "Sir, the captain is impossible to satisfy. I've got the best trained damage control teams in the fleet, and he still finds problems." Hagen smiled. Ellsworth, the captain, survived Pearl Harbor. He watched ships burn because their damage control wasn't good enough. He's not being picky. He's trying to keep us alive. When a 14-inch shell punches through our hull, and we're flooding 3 compartments, you'll be grateful he made you practice this 1,000 times. Welch nodded slowly. "You think we'll face 14-inch shells, sir?" "I think with this, Captain, we'll face whatever the Japanese Navy can throw at us, and I think we'd better be ready." In February 1944, USS Johnston arrived in the Pacific and was assigned to Task Force 38 under Admiral William Halsey. Her first combat operation was providing screening for carrier strikes against Truk Atoll, Japan's Gibraltar of the Pacific. The operation was anticlimactic for Johnston. She screened carriers, patrolled for submarines, and never fired a shot in anger. But Evans used the opportunity to continue training, conducting realistic exercises between combat operations. In March 1944, Johnston participated in the invasion of the Marshall Islands. Again, her role was primarily screening and patrol. Again, no combat action. The crew was getting restless. They'd trained for a year. They were ready to fight. Where were the enemy? Evans understood their frustration, but remained focused. "Be careful what you wish for," he told his officers. "The day will come when we'll face an enemy that outnumbers and outguns us. On that day, you'll wish we'd trained more." In May 1944, Johnston finally saw action during the invasion of Saipan. A Japanese submarine attempted to penetrate the screening formation. Johnston detected it on sonar and conducted a depth charge attack that resulted in oil and debris surfacing. A probable kill. The crew erupted in cheers. They'd drawn blood, but Evans remained somber. "Gentlemen, we just killed about 70 men. They were the enemy, yes, but they were also sailors doing their duty just like us. Respect your enemy, because one day you might be in their position." Throughout the summer of 1944, Johnston participated in multiple operations: the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the invasion of Guam, carrier strikes on the Philippines. She was always in the thick of things, always aggressive, always ready. But fate kept her from the major surface action that Evans had trained her for. That would change in October. By October 1944, Johnston had been in the Pacific for 8 months. She had steamed over 50,000 miles. She had been to sea for 200 of the last 240 days. Her crew was exhausted but supremely competent. They knew their ship intimately. They trusted their captain completely. They were as ready as any warship crew could be. On October 20th, 1944, Johnston supported the invasion of Leyte in the Philippines. The invasion proceeded smoothly. The crew relaxed slightly. Maybe this would be another routine operation. On October 24th, intelligence reported that Japanese naval forces were approaching from multiple directions. Something big was developing. The crew went to modified battle stations. Evans stood on the bridge, studying intelligence reports, and quietly told his executive officer, "Bob, I think this is it. The big one we've been training for." "What makes you think so, sir?" "Because the Japanese are risking everything. They're committing their entire fleet. That means somewhere, somehow, we're going to end up in a surface action against heavy units. And when that happens, we'll need every bit of that training I put you through." Hagen felt a chill run down his spine. "How bad do you think it will be, sir?" Evans looked at him with those dark Cherokee eyes that seemed to see the future. "Bad enough that half of us won't see tomorrow, but we'll do our duty. That's all warriors can do." On the evening of October 24th, Johnston refueled and rearmed. The crew wrote letters home, knowing they might be their last. Some men prayed, others tried to sleep. A few played cards, acting like tomorrow would be just another day. Commander Ernest Evans stood alone on the bridge wing, looking out at the darkened sea, thinking about his great-grandfather, about the trail of tears, about what it meant to be a warrior. Tomorrow, he would find out. October 25th, 1944. 5:30 a.m., 6:40 a.m., the morning of battle. The morning began quietly. Too quietly. USS Johnston was one of 7 destroyers and destroyer escorts screening Task Unit 77.43, call sign Taffy 3, under the command of Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague. Taffy 3 consisted of 6 escort carriers, Fanshawe Bay, St. Lo, White Plains, Kalinin Bay, Kitkun Bay, and Gambier Bay, and their screening ships. These escort carriers, called jeep carriers or baby flat tops, were small, slow vessels designed for anti-submarine warfare and ground support, not fleet combat. They had thin hulls, minimal armor, and top speeds of just 18 knots. Taffy 3's mission was simple: provide air support for the troops ashore at Leyte Gulf. Their position was 50 miles east of Samar Island, in waters thought to be safely behind American lines. Admiral Halsey's powerful Third Fleet, with its fast carriers and battleships, was supposedly guarding the northern approaches. The 7th Fleet's battleships were guarding the southern approaches. Taffy 3 was in the safe zone. At 5:30 a.m., the carriers began launching their first missions of the day. Fighters and bombers lifted off to provide close air support for Army units ashore. It was routine, almost boring. At 6:30 a.m., a Taffy 3 pilot on anti-submarine patrol radioed back an urgent contact report. He'd spotted what looked like Japanese ships coming. Through San Bernardino, straight, the passage north of Samar Island that was supposed to be guarded by Admiral Halsey's fleet. The report was initially dismissed as mistaken identity. Those were probably American ships. Halsey was up there. There was no way Japanese heavy units could penetrate that far south undetected. At 6:37 a.m., every assumption shattered. Aboard USS Johnston, radar operator Robert Billy was conducting his routine morning scan when his screen suddenly filled with contacts. Not 1 or 2, dozens, all large, all closing fast from the north, bridge combat. Multiple surface contacts bearing 340, range 2,000 yards. Count. Jesus Christ, sir. I count 4 big boys, multiple heavy contacts, numerous small contacts. Sir, this looks like an entire fleet. Commander Evans was on the bridge instantly. Combat confirm contact. Are these friendlies? Sir, they're coming from San Bernardino Strait. That's supposed to be Japanese-controlled waters. And, sir, the radar cross-sections are enormous. These aren't destroyers. These are battleships. Evans grabbed his binoculars and scanned the northern horizon. At first, he saw nothing but morning haze. Then, as the sun broke through the clouds, he saw them, pagoda masts, the distinctive superstructures of Japanese capital ships. Not 1 or 2, but a forest of them, stretching across the horizon. And they were close. Terrifyingly close, already within gun range of the escort carriers. Evans' mind raced through the tactical situation in seconds. Halsey had been lured north by a Japanese decoy force. He'd taken the bait and left San Bernardino Strait unguarded. The Japanese had sent their remaining battle fleet through the strait during the night, and now that fleet had stumbled upon Taffy 3, the only American force standing between them and the invasion beaches. The mathematics were horrifying. 4 Japanese battleships, each displacing between 36,000 and 72,000 tons, armed with guns ranging from 14-inch to 18.1-inch. 6 heavy cruisers with 8-inch and 10-inch guns, 2 light cruisers, 11 destroyers. Total tonnage, over 400,000 tons against them. 6 escort carriers with 5-inch pop guns meant for anti-aircraft work. 7 destroyers and destroyer escorts, the largest of which, Johnston, displaced 2,700 tons. It was David versus Goliath. except David had 6 brothers, and Goliath had brought his entire extended family. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Hagen arrived at a dead run. "Sir, combat reports confirmed enemy contacts. Multiple battleships and cruisers. Range approximately 15 miles and closing. Orders from Admiral Sprague are to prepare for surface action," and he was cut off by the distinctive whistling shriek of incoming heavy shells. Every man on the bridge instinctively ducked as massive columns of water erupted near Fanshawe Bay, the lead carrier. The Japanese had opened fire. Those first shells, 18.1-inch rounds from the super battleship Yamato, weighed 3,200 pounds each. They were fired from guns so powerful that their muzzle blast could kill a man standing too close. They could punch through 3 feet of steel armor. And they were being fired at escort carriers with quarter-inch hulls. If those shells hit, the carriers would simply cease to exist. Admiral Sprague, aboard Fanshawe Bay, immediately grasped the desperate situation. His slow carriers couldn't outrun battleships. His 5-inch guns couldn't penetrate battleship armor. His aircraft were armed with anti-submarine weapons and small bombs, not ship-killing torpedoes. He had exactly one option: run south toward a rain squall and pray his screening ships could somehow delay the Japanese long enough for his carriers to escape. He issued immediate orders. Carriers to make best speed south, launch all aircraft and make smoke. Screening ships to take station between the carriers and enemy, make smoke and prepare for torpedo attack. And then Admiral Sprague did something that surprised everyone listening. He got on the radio and began pleading for help from any American ship that could hear him. "This is Taffy 3. We are under attack by Japanese battleships. Request immediate assistance from all friendly units. Our position is..." That's when Commander Ernest Evans made the decision that would define the battle. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't form up with the other destroyers. He didn't consult with his superiors. He saw Japanese battleships closing on American carriers, and his Cherokee warrior instinct made the decision for him. All ahead flank. Left full rudder. All hands to battle stations. Load all guns. Prepare torpedoes for immediate launch. We're attacking. The bridge erupted in stunned activity. Officers and sailors sprang to execute his orders, even as their minds reeled at what those orders meant. Lieutenant DeGardi, the gunnery officer, stared at his captain in disbelief. "Sir, attacking? Sir, those are battleships." "I'm aware of that, Mr. DeGardi. Now get to your station and prepare to engage." Lieutenant Commander Hagen grabbed Evans' arm. "Sir, Admiral Sprague's orders were to screen the carriers, not to independently attack." Evans gently removed Hagen's hand from his arm. His eyes locked on the distant Japanese ships. "Bob, those carriers are dead if somebody doesn't stop those battleships. We're the only ship in position to attack right now. So we attack. Now get below and prepare for surface action. We're going to need every man at his station." Hagen stared at his captain for one more second, realized argument was futile, and sprinted off the bridge shouting orders. Evans keyed the general announcing system. His voice boomed throughout the ship, calm and steady despite the insanity of what he was about to do. "All hands, this is the captain. We have just encountered the Japanese battle fleet. 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, multiple escorts. They're trying to sink our carriers and massacre our troops on the beaches. We're going to stop them." He paused, letting that sink in. "I know what you're thinking. How does one destroyer stop a battle fleet? The answer is we don't stop them. We hurt them. We force them to react to us instead of focusing on the carriers. We make them afraid of us. And if necessary, we ram the biggest ship we can find and take her with us to the bottom." Another pause. Men throughout the ship stood frozen at their stations, listening. "I promised you on commissioning day that this ship would always go forward. I meant it. We're going forward right now, straight at the enemy. Some of us won't survive the next hour, but all of us will do our duty. Man your stations, do your jobs, trust your training, and follow me into the fight, because that's what warriors do. Captain out." As Evans' words echoed through the ship, USS Johnston heeled hard to port, black smoke pouring from her stacks as her engines wound up to maximum power, her 5.5-inch guns trained out toward the enemy. Her torpedo tubes swung toward firing bearings. 327 men prepared for the most desperate fight of their lives. At 6:41 a.m., exactly 4 minutes after first contact, USS Johnston broke formation and charged directly toward the center of the Japanese battle line. She was alone. The other American destroyers were still forming up, still waiting for coordinated attack orders. But Johnston was already accelerating to her maximum 36 knots, her bow cutting through the calm morning sea, every gun crew ready, every damage control team standing by, her captain on the bridge wing with binoculars raised, calmly plotting his attack against an enemy force that outweighed his ship 50-1. Admiral Sprague, watching from Fanshawe Bay's bridge, grabbed his binoculars and focused on the lone destroyer racing toward the enemy. "What ship is that?" he demanded. His operations officer checked the recognition signals. "Sir, that's USS Johnston. Commander Evans commanding." "What the hell is he doing?" "I didn't order an independent attack." "Sir, I don't think he waited for orders. He just went." Sprague watched in stunned silence as the tiny destroyer continued accelerating toward the massive enemy fleet. Then he said something that would appear in the official battle report. "That man is either the bravest officer in the United States Navy or completely insane. Possibly both." At 6:45 a.m., the lead Japanese ships noticed the American destroyer charging toward them. The heavy cruiser Kumano, leading the cruiser column, turned her 8-inch batteries toward Johnston and fired her first salvo. The Battle off Samar had begun, and USS Johnston was already committed to a fight that no sane person would ever seek. Charging, 4 battleships with 5 guns and sheer audacity, fought at 7:20 a.m. Johnston's first attack run. The first Japanese salvo fell 1,000 yards short of Johnston, sending up massive geysers of water that drenched the forward decks. The second salvo was 500 yards short. The third salvo straddled the destroyer, shells landing both ahead and behind, meaning the Japanese gunners had found the range. The fourth salvo would hit. Commander Evans stood on the bridge wing, stopwatch in hand, counting the seconds between Japanese salvos. He was calculating enemy fire control, how fast they loaded, how long they took to adjust aim when they would fire again. 23 seconds between salvos, he muttered to himself. 6-gun broadside, probably 8-inch, Kumano-class cruiser, range approximately 16,000 yards. His officer of the deck, Lieutenant Ed DeGardi, stared at his captain in amazement. The man was calmly analyzing enemy fire control, while shells the size of telephone poles were exploding around them. "Sir, recommend evasive maneuvers." "Not yet. If we maneuver now, we'll just delay getting into torpedo range. We hold course until—" Evans glanced at his stopwatch. "Now, right full rudder." Johnston heeled hard to starboard, just as the next Japanese salvo arrived. 6 massive shells slammed into the ocean, exactly where Johnston would have been if she'd held course. The nearest shell detonated less than 50 yards off the port bow, close enough that the explosion threw spray completely over the bridge. "Steady up on course 280. Maintain flank speed." Evans was zigzagging, not randomly but systematically based on enemy salvo timing. By calculating when the Japanese would fire, he could maneuver just before the shells arrived, forcing the enemy to constantly re-aim. It was a deadly game of timing, and if he miscalculated by even a few seconds, Johnston would be destroyed. At 6:50 a.m., with the range down to 14,000 yards, 7 miles, Evans ordered his guns to open fire. "All batteries commence firing. Target the leading heavy cruiser. Rapid fire!" Johnston's 5 5-inch guns roared, sending shells downrange at a combined rate of 1 shell every 3 seconds. The guns were firing at maximum range, where the shells were falling like howitzer rounds rather than flat trajectory shots. At this distance, the shells couldn't penetrate heavy armor, but that wasn't the point. Chief Gunner's Mate Lawrence Hubbard, directing the forward gun mount, understood exactly what his captain was doing. "We're not trying to sink them, boys. We're trying to blind them. Dump shells in their face. Make their gunners flinch. Keep firing." The continuous fire created a forest of splashes around the Japanese cruisers, forcing their gunners to track targets through a maze of shell impacts and spray. It degraded their accuracy just enough to give Johnston a fighting chance, but the Japanese were firing back with overwhelming volume. By 7 a.m., 3 Japanese heavy cruisers, Kumano, Suzuya, and Chikuma, and 2 light cruisers had all shifted fire to Johnston. Over 60 heavy guns were targeting 1 destroyer. The ocean around Johnston became a maelstrom of explosions. Massive columns of water, some 50 feet high, some 100 feet high, erupted continuously. The noise was deafening. The ship shuddered from near misses. Salt spray mixed with powder smoke reduced visibility to near zero. On the bridge, Evans calmly continued his deadly calculus, timing his turns to thread Johnston through gaps in the shell pattern. His crew would later describe it as watching a man play chess against death itself. At 7:05 a.m., the range was down to 10,000 yards. Close enough. Prepare to fire torpedoes. All tubes. Set depth 6 feet, speed 46 knots, run to enable. Chief Torpedo Man James Howe acknowledged the order and made the final adjustments to his firing solution. They were in a stern chase. Johnston was charging almost directly at the enemy, which meant the torpedoes would have to lead the target significantly. But Howe had practiced this exact scenario hundreds of times during Evans' endless training drills. Solution locked. Ready to fire on your order, sir. Evans watched the range close. 9,000 yards, too far. 8,000 yards. Still too far for guaranteed hits. 7,000 yards. Close enough. And they weren't going to get any closer without being destroyed. Fire all torpedoes. Torpedoes away. 10 Mark 15 torpedoes, each 24 feet long, each weighing 3,800 pounds, each carrying 825 pounds.